What if I told you there was a moment on Family Feud that had Steve Harvey firing back at a contestant so sharply, the entire studio went silent? Welcome to Harvey's Highlights, the channel where we dive into the most unforgettable, shocking, and jaw-dropping moments from Family Feud and beyond. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of these incredible stories. This episode took place during a particularly intense game. The contestants were giving their answers, laughter and tension filling the studio. Everything seemed normal until one contestant, clearly confident and maybe a little too cocky, threw out a comment that caught Steve completely off guard. The audience gasped, sensing the tension in the air. Steve, always quick with a reaction, initially tried to mask his surprise with humor. "Oh, you went there?" he said, raising his eyebrows. The contestants smirked, seemingly unaware of the storm they had just unleashed. "I mean, that's just how I think," they said casually. Steve paused, looking at the camera and the audience, then leaned in slightly. "Now, hold on a second. That's not what we do here," he said firmly, his tone a mix of disbelief and authority. The studio grew quiet. You could hear a pin drop. "We play for fun. We joke. But there's a line," Steve added, pointing gently at the contestant. The contestant tried to backtrack, but Steve wasn't letting it slide. "I'm not mad. I'm just surprised. That was bold. I'll give you that," he said, shaking his head with a half smile. The audience laughed nervously, caught between tension and amusement. One of the other contestants whispered to their teammate, "Did he just snap at them?" The tension was palpable, and Steve's reaction reminded everyone that even on a game show, respect and timing matter. "All right, let's get back to the game before I have to say more," Steve said, regaining his composure but still visibly flustered. This moment wasn't just a typical on-air exchange. It highlighted Steve Harvey's no-nonsense approach and his ability to handle awkward situations with humor and authority. Even the contestants later admitted backstage that they had underestimated him. The incident became one of the most talked-about Family Feud moments that year, shared widely across social media for its mix of shock, comedy, and the unexpected edge from Steve Harvey himself. As the cameras rolled, Steve Harvey took a moment to let the tension settle. The contestant, still grinning nervously, tried to salvage the moment with a joke. "I was just being honest, Steve," they said. Steve looked at them, eyes narrowing slightly but still holding that signature charm. "Honest? That's one way to put it," he replied, his voice calm but carrying that unmistakable edge. The audience, sensing something unusual, leaned forward in their seats. Whispers spread across the studio. Did he really just say that? Some were laughing nervously, while others were wide-eyed, unsure how Steve would handle the situation next. "Y'all know me," Steve continued, pacing slightly on the stage. "I love to laugh. I love a good joke. But there's a difference between funny and wow, you really went there." One of the team members tried to interject, offering a quick apology. "We didn't mean any disrespect, Steve." Steve shook his head, half amused, half exasperated. "It's not about disrespect," he said. "It's about timing and knowing when to push the envelope. You've got to feel the room." He turned to the contestant, leaning in closer. "Now listen, I know you're funny. I know you're quick. But sometimes your mouth gets ahead of your brain. That's all I'm saying," he explained, keeping the audience engaged with every word. The contestant, now realizing the gravity of the moment, nodded slowly. "I see what you mean," they admitted. The producers were visibly tense, watching the exchange unfold. They knew this segment was no longer just about the game. It had become a teachable moment, a live demonstration of Steve's unique ability to balance authority, humor, and human reaction all at once. Steve didn't yell or overreact, but the room understood he had drawn a firm line. "What you've got to learn," Steve added, looking at both teams, "is that respect goes both ways. You can be funny, you can be bold, but you can't forget that we're all here to have a good time, not make people uncomfortable." His tone softened slightly, and the audience exhaled as the tension began to ease. Yet even as the game resumed, there was a lingering energy in the studio. Every laugh and every answer now carried a bit more weight. Contestants were more cautious, the audience more attentive. The moment had become a story in itself, an unforgettable instance when Steve Harvey's sharp wit and authority collided with a contestant's boldness in real time. As the game progressed, the air in the studio remained charged. Contestants were more careful with their answers, stealing glances at Steve Harvey before speaking. The previous exchange had set a precedent, one that reminded everyone that while Family Feud was full of laughs, it was also a stage where respect and timing mattered. Steve leaned on the podium, eyes scanning the team. "All right now," he said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of humor and authority. "Let's see if we can keep it clean. I know y'all can do it." The audience chuckled nervously, sensing the subtle warning embedded in his words. A contestant hesitated, glancing down at the board. Is it stealing candy?" they guessed. Laughter erupted, not from malice, but from the innocent absurdity of the answer. Steve shook his head, smiling now, but with a stern tone. "See? That's the kind of answer that makes me laugh without making anyone uncomfortable. That's the line," he said, pointing gently toward the first contestant who had caused the earlier tension. Turning to the audience, Steve added, "Y'all gotta understand something. Being bold is fun. Being outrageous can be funny. But if you cross a line, even by accident, you gotta be ready for me to call it out. That's my job, and trust me, I don't do it lightly." The contestant who had sparked the earlier moment looked a little sheepish but grateful. I get it, Steve," they said quietly. "I didn't mean to push too far." Steve nodded, placing a reassuring hand on their shoulder. "And that's all I needed to hear. Just remember, funny is good. Shocking is different. Know the difference." The board lit up again as the next question appeared. "Name something people bring to a barbecue," Steve read aloud. Answers flew quickly. Burgers, soda, chips. The energy started to normalize, but the tension from earlier lingered like a faint echo. Steve used the moment to teach, gently weaving life lessons into the humor. "See this?" he said, pointing to the contestants. "This is more than a game. It's about communication, timing, and understanding people. And sometimes," he paused, looking directly into the camera, "it's about knowing when to zip your lips and when to shine." Even the producers exchanged looks, relieved that Steve had navigated the situation with his signature blend of humor and authority. The incident would no doubt become one of those stories talked about for months. A reminder that while Family Feud thrives on laughter, it's also a stage where respect, awareness, and quick thinking are just as important. The tension in the studio began to ebb, but the memory of the earlier insult still hung in the air. Steve Harvey leaned back, letting the contestants take a breath, and addressed the audience. "Y'all ever notice how quickly things can get out of hand when people forget they're on a stage? One word, one comment, and suddenly the whole vibe changes." He shook his head, half smiling, half serious. "That's why I gotta be alert. Not just for the show, but for the people up here and the people watching at home." A new contestant stepped up, her hands slightly trembling. I'm ready," she said, trying to steady her voice. Steve's tone softened. "Good. Just relax. We're here to have fun. That's the bottom line. Remember, it's a game, but how you play it matters too." The question flashed on the board. "Name a job that requires a uniform." Answers came quickly. Police officer, firefighter, nurse. But then one contestant smirked, attempting humor again. "Clown?" they said with a chuckle, trying to test the waters. The audience burst into laughter. Steve, however, paused for a moment, raising an eyebrow. "Now see," he said. "That's clever. You get a laugh without throwing shade. That's how you do it." He turned toward the camera, addressing viewers directly. "You see, this is the beauty of live television. It's unpredictable. People say things they might not think through. And that's why you need someone like me to manage it. Someone who can laugh, but also knows when to step in." The contestant who had caused the earlier incident quietly muttered, "I'll be careful." Steve smiled, acknowledging their sincerity. "That's all I needed. You learn fast, you grow, and the show goes on. Just remember, every word counts. The game picked up pace again, but this time, it carried an unspoken lesson. The audience, now more aware of the stakes, clapped with each correct answer, cheering for both the contestants' wit and Steve's ability to maintain control. Between jokes and laughter, Steve reminded everyone that Family Feud was about much more than points. It was about timing, respect, and understanding. The energy slowly returned to its playful rhythm, with Steve cracking jokes, contestants laughing nervously, and the audience fully engaged. But behind the smiles, the studio had learned an important truth. In the world of live television, one moment could change everything, and the way you respond could define the show. By now, the tension in the studio had shifted into a mix of relief and lingering curiosity. Everyone was eager to see how the rest of the game would unfold after the earlier confrontation. Steve Harvey, sensing the mood, leaned forward, resting his elbows on the podium, and said with a wry grin, "All right, y'all, we've seen a lot today. Some laughter, some lessons, and a few reminders that words carry weight. Let's finish this the right way." The next question lit up on the board. Name something people often forget to do before leaving the house. Answers came quickly. Lock the door, feed the dog, turn off the stove. But one contestant hesitated, looking at Steve with uncertainty. Check your tone?" they offered quietly. The audience laughed, and Steve's eyes widened in surprise. "Now that's smart. That's real talk," he exclaimed. "See, that's what I'm talking about. You learn, you adapt, and you keep it respectful. That's how you play this game." Steve then turned toward the contestant who had caused the tension earlier. "Look, I know things got a little heated," he said calmly. "But I also saw how you picked yourself up. That's what I like to see. Growth, awareness, respect, and laughter. Don't forget the laughter." The audience applauded, the energy now lighter, the laughter genuine. The contestants began to bond, sharing small jokes and stories about past experiences with family feuds of their own. Steve smiled, leaning back with that signature chuckle. "You know, this is what Family Feud is really about. Life happens, mistakes happen, tempers flare. But at the end of the day, we come together and find the humor in it. That's what keeps us going." As the final round approached, the contestants focused intently, answering questions with newfound care. Steve guided them with both encouragement and his trademark humor, seamlessly balancing the competitive edge with the lesson learned earlier. "It's not just about getting the answers," he reminded them. "It's about how you handle yourself when things go sideways. That's the real win." By the end of the episode, laughter filled the studio once more, but the memory of the earlier insult had transformed into a story of reflection, growth, and understanding. Steve Harvey, ever the showman but also the mentor, gave a final nod to the contestants. "Remember this, how you act matters. Words matter. Respect matters. And yes, we'll keep playing, but never forget why we're here. To connect, to laugh, and maybe to learn a thing or two along the way." The cameras cut to commercial, but the lessons of that day lingered. Contestants, audience members, and viewers at home had witnessed not just a game, but a live demonstration of leadership, patience, and humanity, all under the bright lights of Family Feud. This concluded the unforgettable episode that proved even a simple game show could carry weight, lessons, and moments of reflection that stay with people long after the cameras stop rolling.